Welcome to Momentum Mind, where thoughts turn into power and stories become transformation. Here, every word is crafted to awaken the strength already inside you. So take a deep breath, let the world fade for a moment and step with me into a story that can reshape how you think, feel, and live. This is more than just a book, it's a mirror for the mind. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Mirror of the Mind. The morning sunlight seeped through the half-open window, falling in golden slivers across the small wooden floor of a modest room. Thomas leaned against the frame, gazing at the town below. The streets were waking slowly, children chasing each other with shouts, merchants setting up their stalls, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer rhythmically shaping metal. Yet, despite the life around him, Thomas felt a quiet weight pressing against his chest. He couldn't name it, a restlessness, a fog of doubt, a faint sense that life might be slipping past while he watched. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the unease. For years, he had moved through the world like a shadow, observing but never daring. Each day felt like a repetition of the last, the same walk to the market, the same small talk with neighbors, the same hollow satisfaction when he returned home. But this morning, something within him whispered differently. A thought had planted itself, tiny but insistent. Is this all there is? Thomas wandered through his modest town, each corner familiar yet strangely strange. The baker's scent of warm bread brought no comfort, the fountain in the square offered no reflection, only ripples of uncertainty. He found himself at the edge of the river that cut through the town, watching the water flow. There was a rhythm to it, constant, patient, unstoppable. And in its mirror-like surface, he thought he could see not just his own reflection, but something deeper, something unformed. Who am I becoming? He whispered to the wind. The question startled him. It felt as if he had spoken aloud a truth he had been avoiding all his life. As he stared at the water, he realized that his face, so familiar, so ordinary, had begun to seem like a mask he wore. Behind it, his thoughts wandered, tangled in fear, hope, doubt, and desire. And yet, buried beneath all of that, he sensed a quiet possibility, fragile as the first green shoots of spring. Walking back through the cobblestone streets, Thomas noticed how small choices shaped the rhythm of his day. He watched a boy give a loaf of bread to a hungry dog, a woman smile at a passerby carrying too many bundles. These moments, he realized, were not accidental. They sprang from the minds of those who acted, from the thoughts they harbored. And then, suddenly, a thought struck him with startling clarity. If their small thoughts can shape such small miracles, what could my thoughts shape? He reached his home, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old journal, its pages yellowed and frayed at the edges. Thomas began to write, not about what had happened, but about what he thought, about the patterns that governed his feelings and actions. He wrote of the fog in his mind, of the shadows that lingered in his heart, and of the flickers of hope that occasionally shone through. Hours passed, and the room grew dim. A single candle flickered, casting moving shadows across the walls. Thomas paused and read what he had written. He realized that his mind had been a garden neglected, choked with weeds of doubt, fear, and resentment. And yet, it was also fertile soil. With care, with intention, it could bloom. As he closed the journal and blew out the candle, a strange clarity settled over him. He could almost hear the pulse of possibility, like a whisper through the floorboards. The thought that had been planted that morning grew into something more insistent, more demanding. Your life is the harvest of your mind. What will you plant? Thomas lay down on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the town had quieted, but the question lingered, heavier than the night itself. And in the depths of his mind, he felt the first stirrings of something powerful and unknown. It was both frightening and exhilarating. He realized that tomorrow, nothing would be quite the same. Yet, as he drifted into uneasy sleep, a shadow passed across the window. A visitor, or perhaps a warning, Thomas could not tell. Something had begun moving in the world outside his walls, something that would test the thoughts he was only just beginning to shape. And with that shadow, the night seemed to whisper, the work of the mind is about to become real. Are you ready? Chapter 2. Seeds of Change. The morning arrived with a soft chill, and Thomas stepped out into the quiet streets of the town, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and fresh bread. He felt different, though he could not yet name how. His mind, once a tangle of drifting thoughts, hummed with an unfamiliar alertness. Every sound, every flicker of movement, seemed sharper, more deliberate. It was as if the world itself was waiting for him to notice, and he did. He wandered toward the marketplace, but this time he did not drift. He observed the way the sunlight danced across the roof tiles, the way the blacksmith's hammer struck metal in precise, rhythmic beats, the subtle shift of a merchant's eyes when he calculated a price in his head. Thomas realized that these people, these ordinary townsfolk, carried entire worlds within their minds, unseen yet powerful. Their thoughts had shaped their actions, and their actions had shaped the town. If they could create a small order in their world, perhaps he could, too. On a narrow street corner, he paused by a small garden. A woman knelt among her flowers, her hands covered in soil, her face serene. Thomas watched the vibrant petals, the delicate green stems stretching upward, and felt a pang of longing. She was creating beauty, and it was immediate, tangible. The thought came unbidden, what beauty could I cultivate in my own life? He carried that question with him as he returned home, through streets that suddenly seemed to hum with possibilities. Once inside, he took the journal from the drawer again and began to write. Not random words, but intentions. Thoughts of courage, of patience, of clarity. Thoughts of gratitude for the small blessings he had long ignored. And as he wrote, he began to notice something strange. The heaviness in his chest, the fog that had clung to him for years, seemed to lift. He felt lighter, as if the very act of observing his own mind had begun to clear the air. Days passed, each one a subtle experiment. Thomas noticed that when he allowed thoughts of hope and purpose to take root, the world responded. A neighbor smiled more readily, a letter arrived from a distant friend, the bread at the baker's stall seemed sweeter, richer than before. Even the river, so constant and indifferent, seemed to flow with a new rhythm, sparkling as though reflecting the stirring inside him. Yet not all thoughts were easy to plant. Doubt crept in like a shadow at the edge of his awareness. Who am I to change my life? What if I fail? What if nothing changes? These questions threatened to undo the fragile progress he had begun. He struggled against them, wrestling with the invisible currents in his mind. And slowly, he realized that the struggle itself was a teacher. The more he resisted negative thoughts, the clearer and stronger his positive ones became. It was as if the mind had its own invisible scales, and by choosing carefully, he could tip them toward light. One afternoon, Thomas walked along the riverbank, the wind tugging at his coat, carrying scents of pine and damp earth. A stranger sat on a worn bench, sketching the flowing water. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of inner work, a shared understanding that life was crafted as much by thought as by action. The stranger smiled and spoke a single sentence that lodged in Thomas's mind: a garden of thought is the beginning of a garden of life. Thomas repeated the phrase in his head, turning it over, feeling it settle. The world seemed to hold its breath as he contemplated it. The river flowed, the birds circled above, but beneath it all, an invisible shift was occurring. He sensed that the patterns in his mind were beginning to ripple outward into the world, though he did not yet know how far the effect could reach. That evening, as the town fell into quiet, Thomas returned to his journal. He traced the thoughts he had nurtured, noting their subtle consequences, their quiet power. And then, as his candle flickered against the walls, a sudden knock at the door startled him. No one visited his home. Not ever. He hesitated, heart pounding, and approached the door slowly. Another knock, firmer this time. Thomas gripped the handle, a chill crawling up his spine. He opened it to find a small envelope resting on the doorstep. No name. No mark. Only a single word, written in careful, elegant script: begin. Thomas stared at the envelope, fingers trembling. The word seemed to pulse with energy, echoing inside him. Was it a warning? An invitation? Or something more mysterious, a signal that his thoughts, his power, were about to be tested in ways he could not yet imagine? As the candle guttered and the night deepened, Thomas felt the first tendrils of both excitement and fear intertwining in his chest. He had taken the first steps into the unseen world of his mind, but now, it seemed, something outside that world was calling him to action. And as he tore the envelope open, the night held its breath, and the words inside promised a challenge that would change everything. Chapter 3: The First Trial. Thomas sat at his small wooden table, the envelope open before him. Inside was a single slip of paper, its edges slightly curled, with a short message written in the same elegant script: your mind will shape what your eyes cannot yet see. Begin the work. The words pulsed faintly in the dim candlelight, as if alive, whispering a challenge he could not ignore. He stared at them for a long time. What could it mean? His mind had already begun to change, yet the message hinted at something beyond what he could control or even imagine. A shiver ran through him, equal parts fear and anticipation. He knew instinctively that the next steps would demand more than quiet reflection. His thoughts had to become action. The following morning, Thomas walked through the town with a careful attention he had never known. Every sound, every gesture, every flicker of expression became a sign. Faces that once blurred into the crowd now held subtle stories. He noticed a young girl tugging her mother's sleeve, her eyes wide with worry, an old man staring longingly at the fountain, hands trembling as he reached for the coins he carried. Each small scene tugged at Thomas's heart, and he felt a strange compulsion to intervene, to act, to extend the ripples of his newly awakened thoughts into the lives of others. He paused by the baker's stall and hesitated. There, in the warm aroma of bread, he saw a man slouching by the corner, his coat worn, his eyes filled with fatigue and doubt. Without thinking fully, Thomas approached him and offered a piece of bread. The man looked at him, startled, then smiled faintly, a light breaking across his face. Something in Thomas's chest shifted, a subtle thrill, the first taste of seeing his inner thoughts transform the world around him. Encouraged, he moved through the town with intention, small acts of kindness guided by quiet contemplation. A woman struggling with a basket of goods received his help, a child lost in the square found his way with Thomas's patient guidance. With each gesture, Thomas felt the energy of his mind flowing outward, shaping not only his actions but the very atmosphere of the streets. It was exhilarating, almost intoxicating, yet as the day wore on, Thomas began to notice shadows creeping along the edges of his experiences. A merchant, once smiling, gave him a suspicious glance, a neighbor muttered words he could not hear, his expression sharp. Doubts returned, sharper now. Am I imagining this? Am I truly changing anything, or am I simply fooling myself? The warmth of accomplishment battled with a creeping chill of uncertainty. By late afternoon, Thomas found himself at the river again, the water moving like liquid glass beneath the shifting light. He sat on the bank, trying to steady his mind. The stranger from before had spoken of a garden of thought, and he now understood the meaning in practice. Every action he had taken, every intention he had planted, produced something, yet not always what he expected. Some seeds sprouted, others failed. And some, he feared, might grow into consequences he could not control. As he wrestled with these thoughts, a sudden commotion in the square drew his attention. A small crowd had gathered around a man shouting furiously at another, words sharp, hands raised. Thomas felt the tension surge through him, a mirror of the turmoil in his own mind. He realized, with a jolt, that his thoughts alone were not enough. They had to be tested against the chaos of the world, against resistance, against forces he had yet to face. Compelled, he stepped into the square. The shouting ceased for a moment as the crowd noticed him, a stranger who had recently become familiar only in fleeting glimpses. Thomas raised his hands, not to command, but to focus, to center himself. He thought of calm, of understanding, of the invisible threads that connected human hearts. Slowly, the anger softened, the voices lowered, and the two men facing each other stepped back, breathing heavily but without further conflict. The crowd dispersed, murmuring. Thomas stood alone, chest heaving, aware that he had felt the raw power of thought meet the unpredictability of life. That evening, he returned home, exhausted but alive with a new understanding. The mind could indeed shape reality, but the shaping was delicate, precise, and sometimes precarious. One misstep, one wavering thought, and the ripple could falter or twist unexpectedly. He realized that the work would demand discipline, vigilance, and courage beyond anything he had yet summoned. As he sat at his table, he opened the journal and wrote furiously, cataloguing each act, each emotion, each flicker of doubt and triumph. And then, a faint scratching sound at the window caught his attention. He rose, heart quickening. Outside, a small blackbird perched on the sill, its eyes fixed on him. Around its leg was a tiny scroll, tied with a delicate ribbon. Thomas's hands trembled as he untied it and unfurled the message, "The test deepens. What you think now will shape what you fear tomorrow." The words seemed to linger in the room, thick as fog, heavy with both promise and threat. Thomas felt a ripple of fear, and not for himself, but for what might happen if he failed. The blackbird blinked at him once, then took flight into the darkening sky. Thomas watched it vanish, leaving him with the echo of the message and the undeniable sense that the first trial was only the beginning. A storm seemed to whisper beyond the horizon, and Thomas understood, deep in his chest, that the next day would demand more than thought and action. It would demand transformation, a confrontation with the hidden currents of his mind that he had only begun to glimpse. And as the candle guttered in the quiet room, Thomas realized that he was standing on the edge of something vast, something unseen, something that could either lift him into a new life or sweep him into the shadows he had long feared. Chapter 4: The Weight of Thoughts. The next morning, Thomas awoke with the chill of unease clinging to him like fog. The message from the blackbird had lingered in his mind through the night, each word echoing with unrelenting clarity, "What you think now will shape what you fear tomorrow." He rose from his narrow bed, hands trembling slightly, and stared out the window at the awakening town. The streets looked familiar, yet somehow distant, as if a hidden layer had been revealed, a layer where thoughts held tangible weight, where the invisible threads of intention and consequence wove quietly beneath everyday life. He tried to shake the heaviness, but it pressed down relentlessly. Every choice felt magnified, every interaction loaded with significance. Thomas wandered through the marketplace, noting the usual rhythm of life, vendors arranging goods, children darting between stalls, the clink of coins, the distant hum of conversation. Yet, everything seemed to vibrate with possibility. A thought here, a word there, could change the course of events in ways he could not yet measure. By midday, he found himself sitting on a worn bench in the town square. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, attempting to center himself. Inwardly, he recognized a truth that had been stirring for days. Thought was not just power, it was responsibility. Each idea, each lingering emotion, could shape not only his life but the lives of those around him. Fear, anger, envy, they could spill outward like shadows. Gratitude, patience, courage, they could shine light where darkness lingered. A commotion near the fountain drew his attention. A boy had tripped, spilling a basket of apples. The vendor, red-faced and shouting, seemed about to lash out, and the crowd began to murmur. Instinctively, Thomas stepped forward, thinking calmly, let there be understanding, not anger. He knelt, helping the boy gather the apples, speaking softly to soothe the rising tension. The vendor paused, eyes narrowing, then slowly exhaled, the anger dissipating like smoke. The crowd murmured, then dispersed. Thomas realized that his thoughts had acted almost like a lever, moving the world gently, subtly, yet with undeniable effect. But as the day wore on, he noticed something troubling. Small doubts, persistent and insidious, began creeping back into his mind. Thoughts like you are not strong enough or you cannot control what happens gnawed at the edges of his focus. Thomas tried to suppress them, to replace them with thoughts of clarity and purpose, yet their presence was unnerving. It was as if the mind, when pressed, would reveal its hidden currents, its darker recesses. He understood, with a pang of fear, that mastery of thought was not a single achievement but a constant, vigilant effort. That evening, Thomas returned to his journal, writing furiously, recording not just his actions but his feelings, his struggles, the fleeting triumphs and sudden fears. As the candlelight flickered across the pages, he noticed a subtle shift in himself, a faint, almost imperceptible power, a sense of equilibrium growing in the midst of uncertainty. But with it came an acute awareness: the next trial would not be small. It would test him at the very edges of his patience, his focus, and his courage. The sky darkened outside, clouds rolling in with a low, rumbling growl. Thomas stepped to the window, watching the first drops of rain streak across the glass. The town, usually warm and familiar, now seemed charged with tension, as though the storm was not only in the sky but within the thoughts of every inhabitant. He shivered, not from cold, but from anticipation, feeling that the unseen forces he had begun to navigate were drawing nearer. A sudden knock at the door made him start. It was neither soft nor hesitant, it carried weight, urgency. Thomas approached cautiously, heart pounding. Outside, no one was visible, only the rain-soaked street shimmering under the lamplight. On the doorstep lay a small, soaked notebook, its leather cover cracked and worn. Thomas picked it up, hands slick with rain, and opened it. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting, phrases and sentences that seemed to pulse with life. Your mind is a lantern. If you let fear control it, darkness spreads. If you let courage guide it, light will reach beyond what you see. Choose. Thomas sank to the floor, absorbing the words. He felt a chill, a thrill, and a sharp twinge of fear all at once. The notebook seemed alive, whispering possibilities and consequences in every curve of its letters. He realized that he was not merely learning about the power of thought, he was being drawn into a web of challenges, each more intricate than the last. What he thought, what he allowed, what he feared, all would ripple outward, shaping lives, shaping events, shaping him. As he closed the notebook, a shadow passed across the room. At first, he thought it was the wind, the flickering candle casting strange shapes on the wall. But then he saw it again, a subtle shift, a movement that didn't belong to any human or animal. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. The unseen world he had glimpsed through thought was becoming tangible, pressing in on him in ways he could no longer ignore. And as the rain beat harder against the windows, the wind rising to a howl, Thomas understood that the trial ahead would not be about small kindnesses or quiet reflection. It would demand a confrontation with the very essence of his mind, with the hidden fears and unspoken desires he had long avoided. The candle flickered, guttered, and then steadied, casting long shadows across the room. Thomas sat, heart pounding, knowing that sleep would bring no rest. The notebook lay open before him, the words seeming to breathe, to pulse with an urgency that made the air tremble. Outside, the storm gathered its strength. Inside, Thomas felt the stirrings of something vast, powerful, and undeniable, the full weight of thought pressing upon him. And then, a single, unmistakable sound, a knock at the window. A voice, low and urgent, whispered through the rain, your mind is the key. But beware, not all doors it opens are safe. Thomas froze, the candlelight trembling, the storm howling, and a sudden understanding gripping him. The first real trial of thought had only just begun. Chapter 5. Shadows in the mind. Morning broke with a muted grey light, filtered through thick clouds that lingered over the town. Thomas awoke slowly, the memory of last night's storm pressing against his chest like a weight he could not lift. The whisper outside his window, "Not all doors it opens are safe," echoed relentlessly in his mind. He rose and moved to the small wooden table where the soaked notebook still lay, its pages damp but legible. He traced the words with his fingertips, feeling the pulse of something alive beneath the ink. The town was quieter than usual. Even the blacksmith's hammer struck with a muted rhythm, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Thomas walked the streets with heightened awareness, noticing details he had once overlooked: the strain in a woman's smile, the hesitation in a child's step, the subtle tension in the way men exchanged greetings. Each of these tiny moments seemed charged, vibrating with consequences of unseen thoughts, and Thomas felt both exhilaration and fear. He stopped by the river, the water grey and restless under the storm clouds. Thomas sat on a familiar stone, watching the currents move, thinking about the notebook's warning. He realized that the mind could open doors to opportunities, but also to dangers, doors that led not to light, but to shadows. And some of those shadows live within me, he thought, feeling a chill creep along his spine. Determined to understand, he began an experiment. He allowed himself to focus on a single thought: courage. He concentrated on it, shaping it with intention, feeling it expand and thrum like a heartbeat in his chest. Then he reached out to the town, performing small acts with deliberate awareness, greeting a stranger with warmth, offering a basket of apples to a tired mother, helping a man untangle a stubborn rope. With each act, he noticed subtle shifts: tension eased, smiles appeared, eyes brightened. He felt the thrill of influence, the quiet satisfaction of seeing thought take shape in reality. But as the day progressed, shadows returned. A man he had helped earlier glared at him from across the street, muttering under his breath. A neighbor who had received a kind word seemed distant and cold. The invisible threads Thomas had hoped to weave with courage and care tangled in ways he could not control. Fear, doubt, and frustration began creeping into his mind like creeping fog, and he realized the first lesson: not all outcomes could be guided by thought alone. Evening came, and Thomas returned home, exhausted but restless. He lit a candle and pored over the notebook, searching for guidance. One passage caught his eye, almost leaping from the page: "The mind is both forge and battlefield. You must shape it, or it will shape you. The shadows cannot be ignored, they must be understood." Thomas leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He felt the first real weight of responsibility pressing down on him. His thoughts were no longer harmless, they had the power to lift, to heal, and to harm. And now, the shadows, fear, doubt, envy, impatience, were emerging from corners he had long ignored. The question he could no longer evade pressed on him: can I master them, or will they master me? As night fell, he stepped outside, drawn to the quiet of the town square. The clouds had parted slightly, revealing a sliver of moonlight. He noticed movement near the fountain, a figure, cloaked, watching him from the shadows. The figure did not move closer, but the presence was unmistakable, filled with intent, as though it were waiting, observing, testing. Thomas's pulse quickened. The notebook's warning had not been idle. He felt the shadows within himself stir in response to the figure: doubt, fear, hesitation. He realized that the challenge was not external, it was a reflection of his own mind. The figure in the shadows was a mirror, showing him the unseen fears he had carried silently for years. And in that moment, Thomas understood that true mastery would require courage, patience, and a willingness to confront the darkness within before he could hope to influence the world beyond. The night deepened. Thomas felt the weight of countless unseen eyes upon him, not just the figure in the square but the uncountable threads of thought stretching from his mind to the lives around him. A quiet wind stirred, carrying the scent of rain and distant pine. The figure vanished without a sound, leaving only a lingering sense of purpose and unease. Thomas returned to his room, the notebook open before him. He realized that the journey he had begun was no longer a gentle exploration. It was a trial, a constant test of focus, intention, and strength. The shadows were patient and cunning, creeping in when he least expected them, whispering doubts and fears, demanding attention. And yet, he also felt a stirring of hope, the realization that each conscious thought, each deliberate action, could cut through the darkness, shaping not only his life but the lives of all those around him. As he blew out the candle and lay down, Thomas felt the tension coiling tightly in his chest. Sleep was not rest tonight, it was preparation. Somewhere beyond the town, beyond the river, beyond the shadows he had glimpsed, the next challenge waited. And he knew, with a certainty that made his stomach twist, that it would be harder than anything he had faced so far. Then, just before the edges of consciousness claimed him, he heard it, a whisper carried on the wind, soft and urgent: "The shadows are not the enemy. They are the doorway. Step through, and you will see what you must become." Thomas's eyes snapped open in the darkness, heart hammering. The night was alive, charged with unseen forces, and he realized that the trial of thought was no longer confined to his mind. It had begun to reach into the world, testing him, shaping him, and calling him toward a destiny he could only begin to imagine. Chapter 6. The guiding light. The dawn arrived quietly, the town bathed in a soft silver light that made the familiar streets look almost foreign. Thomas walked slowly, still weighed by the shadows of the previous night. Yet within him, a subtle warmth pulsed, a sense that the trials he had faced, the doubts he had wrestled with, were not mere obstacles but steps, each one leading him closer to understanding. He had begun to see that the mind could be both prison and key, and now he sought the key. He stopped by the edge of the river, watching the water move steadily, oblivious to storms and shadowed minds alike. For the first time, Thomas tried to see the river as a guide rather than a mirror. The water flowed effortlessly, yielding to obstacles yet shaping its own path. He realized that thoughts, like the river, could be gentle yet persistent, subtle yet transformative. This insight filled him with both hope and determination. Thomas returned home, opening the notebook that had become his constant companion. He traced the flowing handwriting, seeking wisdom in its words. One passage seemed to shine brighter than the rest. Clarity of thought is the guiding light. It will illuminate the path when fear obscures it, and it will reveal the next step when doubt clouds the way. Hold it steady. The idea of clarity resonated deeply. Thomas understood that courage alone was insufficient, purpose alone could falter. He needed a guiding principle, a beacon within the mind, to steer him through both shadows and storms. He closed his eyes, drawing breath after steady breath, and focused on a single thought: I will act with clarity, regardless of fear. The test came sooner than he expected. A commotion erupted near the market square, shouts, hurried footsteps, the clash of voices. Thomas ran, heart pounding, and saw a group of men surrounding a young woman. She had dropped a basket, spilling its contents, and frustration had boiled into confrontation. The crowd murmured, some watching, some judging, none intervening. Thomas felt the familiar tug of doubt. What if I fail? What if I make it worse? Then he remembered the river, the notebook, the guiding light of clarity. He stepped forward, calm yet resolute, and addressed the men in a steady voice. His words were simple, but the tone carried certainty. Slowly, tension eased. The men stepped back, the woman gathered her belongings, and the murmuring crowd began to disperse. Thomas realized that his mind, focused and unwavering, had shaped the outcome even before his hands acted. Later, he walked through the quiet streets, replaying the encounter in his mind. The shadows of doubt and fear were still present, but now they seemed smaller, easier to face. He recognized that each act of deliberate thought, each moment of clarity, strengthened him against the internal storms that had once threatened to overwhelm. The guiding light of intention, once faint, was growing into a force he could rely on. That evening, Thomas returned to his home and lit a candle. He opened the journal and began to write, not just recounting events but reflecting on the principles that had guided him. He noted how clarity shaped his interactions, how deliberate thought produced calm where there had been chaos, and how even small actions could ripple outward in ways unseen. A sudden knock at the door broke his concentration. Thomas approached cautiously. There was no one visible outside, only a folded note resting on the threshold. He picked it up and unfolded it, reading the words written in familiar, elegant script: You have glimpsed the power of clarity. But power alone is not enough. The heart must follow, or the mind will falter. Thomas felt a chill, but also a thrill. The message hinted at a deeper truth he had yet to fully understand, that thought and intention must be matched by inner alignment, that action without heartfelt commitment could fail. He realized that the next steps would demand not only focus but honesty, courage, and emotional depth. As he placed the note beside the candle, the flame flickered, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Thomas stared at them, feeling both fear and anticipation. He understood that the trials would grow more complex, the consequences of thought more tangible. Yet for the first time, he felt a steady pulse within him, a guiding light that promised direction amid uncertainty. And then, just as he was about to close his eyes, he heard it, a whisper carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable: the next door is not behind you. It waits ahead, beyond what you have yet dared to imagine. Thomas's heart quickened. The shadows, the trials, the lessons of clarity and intention, all had been preparation. Now the journey would stretch further, testing not only his mind but his heart, and challenging him to step into a world shaped as much by thought as by reality. Chapter 7. The trial. Within the morning air was sharp and cool, carrying the scent of wet earth from the river and the distant hills. Thomas walked slowly through the town, each step deliberate, his mind quiet but alert. He had learned to move with awareness, to notice the subtle interplay of thought, action, and consequence. Yet today, a weight pressed on him heavier than any he had felt before. It was not the world outside that troubled him, but the turbulence within. He had begun to understand that clarity of thought could guide him through ordinary events, but it was powerless against the hidden fears buried deep in his mind. They stirred now, old doubts and insecurities he had long ignored. Who am I to hold such power? One whispered. What if I fail those I wish to help? Another hissed. Thomas felt the familiar chill crawl along his spine, the uncertainty tightening around his chest like a vice. Seeking calm, he walked to the river bank. The water flowed steadily, indifferent yet patient, reflecting the pale sky above. Thomas sat on a smooth stone, closing his eyes. He focused on his breath, imagining the currents of his mind like the currents of the river, shifting, flowing, and unstoppable if left unchecked. He tried to separate the fear from himself, to observe it without judgment, but the shadows resisted, clinging stubbornly. Hours passed. Thomas remained on the bank, wrestling with the storm inside. He realized that these fears were not enemies to be defeated with a single act of courage. They were tests, mirrors, reflections of what he had yet to master. And mastery, he understood, required patience, self-honesty, and relentless attention. When he finally rose, Thomas fell to fragile steadiness. He walked back into the town, his senses heightened. Every face, every gesture, every small interaction seemed magnified. He noticed a child crying quietly by a doorway, a merchant frowning at a missed transaction, a young woman struggling to lift a basket. Each scene was a thread of life, connected invisibly to his own thoughts. He intervened with care, but this time he observed something new. His actions, guided by clarity and intent, were only part of the equation. The emotional tone, the sincerity behind his thoughts, affected the outcome as much as the thought itself. A smile offered without feeling fell flat, a kind word whispered with doubt produced unease. Thomas realized that the mind alone could not shape the world, the heart had to follow, as the note had warned. By late afternoon, exhaustion settled into his bones, but a quiet determination had begun to rise. Thomas returned home, the notebook in his hand. He opened it to a blank page and began to write, recording not just events but emotions, the shadows he had confronted, the subtle lessons they carried. Thought without feeling is a hollow instrument, he wrote. Action guided by heart transforms it into power. A night fell, and the room grew dim. Thomas lit a candle and reviewed his writing. Shadows flickered along the walls, stretching and twisting like the doubts in his mind. He felt a subtle shiver of unease, knowing the trial was far from over. Mastery of thought required more than intention and clarity. It demanded courage in the face of inner storms, honesty with oneself, and relentless vigilance against the pull of old fears. Then a soft tap at the window startled him. Thomas approached cautiously. Outside, perched on the sill, was a small blackbird with bright, intelligent eyes. Around its leg hung a tiny scroll, tied with a red ribbon. Thomas untied it, hands slightly trembling, and unrolled the note. In flowing script, the message read, "The trial within is only the beginning. Your mind can open doors to wonder, but your heart must pass through them to reach truth." Thomas's chest tightened. The message confirmed what he had begun to understand, that thought alone could illuminate the path, but the heart had to follow him through it. And yet, the weight of responsibility pressed down. He had glimpsed the power within, but he had also glimpsed the fragility of the human spirit. One misstep, one moment of insincerity, could unravel what he had worked so hard to build. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Thomas felt the presence of the unseen world pressing closer, the invisible forces of consequence and choice drawing near. The trial within had shown him that mastery was not a destination but a journey, an endless weaving of mind, heart, and action. And as he lay down that night, the blackbird's message still fresh in his mind, Thomas felt both fear and resolve intertwining. The door to truth was not behind him, it waited ahead, shrouded in uncertainty and promise. He closed his eyes, knowing that sleep would bring no escape, only preparation for the trials to come. Somewhere beyond the town, beyond the familiar streets, the next challenge awaited. And Thomas understood, with a deep, unshakable certainty, that it would demand everything he had learned, everything he had yet to discover, and more, the courage to step fully into the unknown, guided by both mind and heart. Chapter 8, The Ripple of Action. The morning arrived softly, sunlight spilling through the narrow streets, brushing rooftops and the cobblestones with warmth. Thomas stepped outside, feeling a quiet urgency in the rhythm of the town. He had learned much about the shadows in his mind, the alignment of heart and thought, but now the world awaited proof that his internal work could ripple outward into tangible change. He walked through the market square, noticing everything with renewed attention. The baker kneaded dough, sweat glistening on his brow, the blacksmith's hammer struck metal with precision, a child's laughter echoed from the fountain. Each small moment was ordinary, yet Thomas now saw them as part of a vast, interconnected web. Every action, he realized, was a reflection of thought, and every thought was capable of shaping action in ways seen and unseen. A commotion caught his attention. A cart had tipped over at the edge of the square, spilling produce into the street. People shouted, some rushed to help, others merely watched. Thomas moved quickly, heart steady, recalling the lessons of clarity and heart. He bent down, helping a merchant lift a sack of apples, offering calm words that soothed both man and crowd. Slowly, tension eased. A woman who had been frightened smiled, a child's mother nodded in gratitude. The ripple of his focused thought moved outward, subtle yet undeniable, but as the day progressed, Thomas noticed something unexpected. Some actions produced results he had not intended. A man he encouraged earlier seemed more restless, his eyes sharp and suspicious. A young woman he had helped stumbled into difficulty with a neighbor, and Thomas felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. The world, he realized, was not a mirror, it was more like a living organism, reacting, adapting, and sometimes resisting the influence of thought. By afternoon, Thomas sat on the riverbank, watching the water flow with its patient rhythm. He reflected on the unseen forces at play, understanding that mastery was not about controlling outcomes but about shaping intentions with precision, honesty, and awareness. Thought was the seed, but action and heart were the soil, sunlight, and rain that allowed it to grow. Without them, even the most well-intentioned seed could fail. That evening, as the town settled into quiet, Thomas returned home, weary but invigorated by the lessons of the day. The notebook lay open, waiting. He wrote diligently, recording each interaction, each ripple, each unexpected outcome. He noted how alignment of mind and heart had amplified the effects of his intentions, and how moments of distraction or doubt had introduced chaos. The process was intricate, delicate, and infinitely complex. A sudden knock at the door drew his attention. He opened it to find no one, only a folded piece of paper lying on the threshold. Thomas picked it up and read the message in flowing script, ripples spread unseen. Some will lift you, others will challenge you. Observe without fear, act without hesitation, and let your heart guide the currents. The words resonated deeply. Thomas understood that he had passed one subtle test: his thoughts, aligned with his heart, had produced ripples in the world. But the real challenge was yet to come. Life, he realized, would test him not only with ordinary moments but with events that could not be predicted or controlled. How he responded to those events, guided by thought, heart, and clarity, would determine the path ahead. The candle flickered as he set the note beside it, shadows dancing across the walls like restless spirits. Thomas felt a surge of resolve. He had glimpsed the power of intention, the strength of heart-guided thought, and the delicate influence of action. Now it was time to step further, to embrace challenges that would demand not just careful thought but courage, persistence, and the wisdom to navigate unforeseen consequences. Outside, the wind carried the scent of approaching rain, a reminder of the unpredictable forces in the world. Thomas knew that every choice, every thought, every act of the heart would create ripples, some gentle, some turbulent, some invisible yet profound. He felt a quiet thrill, the first taste of the vast responsibility and possibility that came with mastering the mind. As he lay down that night, Thomas sensed movement beyond the edges of the familiar world. A presence, unseen but unmistakable, seemed to observe him, testing him silently. The notebook, the blackbird's messages, and his own reflections had prepared him, yet he knew that the next steps would challenge everything he had learned. The ripples of thought had begun, but the tide of consequence was rising, and he would soon see how far it could reach. And in the stillness before sleep claimed him, a whisper carried on the wind, soft yet insistent: the world will answer. Watch closely, think carefully, and step boldly. The ripple becomes the wave. Chapter 9, The Unseen Storm. The morning arrived with a strange tension in the air, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Thomas stepped outside, feeling the familiar pulse of possibility beneath the ordinary streets. The river flowed quietly, yet he sensed an undercurrent, a subtle reminder that life was never entirely predictable. Today, he realized, would not be guided solely by his intention or clarity. Today would test him with forces he could neither foresee nor control. As he walked through the marketplace, he noticed small signs that something had shifted. A merchant's stall, usually orderly, was cluttered and chaotic. A blacksmith's hammer rang unevenly, missing its rhythm. Even the children seemed restless, their laughter sharper, more nervous. Thomas's pulse quickened. He understood instinctively that an unseen storm was approaching, not of wind or rain, but of consequence and circumstance, a challenge that would reach beyond the gentle ripples he had been shaping. The first sign came abruptly. A carriage, overloaded with goods, jolted along the uneven cobblestones and tipped, spilling crates of produce across the street. People shouted, some rushing to help, others stepping back in fear. Thomas's heart surged. This was no small ripple, this was a wave. He moved swiftly, guiding the crowd with calm words, helping lift crates, calming frightened voices. The chaos seemed manageable at first, yet he felt the weight of responsibility pressing against him like a physical force. As he worked, he noticed the effects of his thoughts in real time. A calm word from him could ease panic, a patient gesture could restore cooperation. But still, uncertainty lingered. Some people resisted, some were impatient, some reacted with anger. Thomas realized that the unseen storm was testing more than his actions, it was testing his mind and heart together, pushing him to apply clarity, courage, and empathy simultaneously. By mid-afternoon, the streets had mostly recovered, but the storm was far from over. Thomas felt the tension inside him echo the tension in the town. Every interaction now seemed heightened, charged with consequence. Even the simplest gesture, offering a basket of apples to a child or a smile to a neighbor, carried weight. He began to notice the subtler forms of influence. The unspoken mood of the town shifted in response to his attention, his calm, his focus. The ripple of thought had become a current, and he was at the center. That evening, Thomas returned to his home, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, yet alive with awareness. He lit a candle and examined the notebook, tracing its flowing words with reverent fingers. One passage seemed particularly luminous: storms reveal what is within. Calm is not the absence of turbulence, but the mastery of it. Stand firm, and the unseen will guide you. Thomas leaned back in his chair, understanding fully for the first time that mastery was not about avoiding challenge or chaos, it was about standing firm within it, using the mind and heart together to navigate currents beyond sight. The storm outside had been a test, a lesson in resilience, awareness, and the careful application of thought to action. As night deepened, Thomas sat quietly, listening to the wind stir outside. The town seemed asleep, but he felt the pulse of unseen forces, subtle vibrations in the air that hinted at more challenges to come. He realized that the unseen storm was only the beginning, a precursor to trials that would not just test his mind and heart but his courage, integrity, and determination to act in alignment with the truths he was uncovering. A soft tap at the window startled him. He approached cautiously, heart hammering, and found a small blackbird perched there once again. Its eyes gleamed with intelligence, and a scroll was tied to its leg. Thomas untied it and read the message: "You have faced the storm and held firm. Yet storms come in many forms, unseen, unexpected, unrelenting. Prepare, and remember, the mind shapes, the heart endures, and the soul watches." Thomas felt a shiver run through him. The world outside was no longer merely a stage for his thoughts, it was a living, reactive force that would challenge him in ways both subtle and overt. He realized that every choice, every emotion, every deliberate thought would now interact with the currents of life in ways he could not always anticipate. The candle flickered, casting shadows along the walls that seemed to dance like whispers of the storm. Thomas understood that the lessons he had learned so far, clarity, alignment of mind and heart, the ripple of action, were only the beginning. The true test was approaching, one that would demand all he had cultivated, and perhaps more than he had yet imagined. And as he lay down to rest, the whispers of the storm seemed to follow him into sleep, carrying both warning and promise. The storm is not an enemy. It is the measure of what you are becoming. Chapter 10. The threshold of change. The dawn arrived with a pale, golden light that touched the rooftops and spilled across the cobblestone streets of the town. Thomas stepped outside, feeling the familiar hum of possibility beneath his feet, but today the hum was stronger, deeper, as if the world itself were leaning closer, waiting. He sensed it in the way the wind carried the scent of rain and pine, in the subtle tension of voices in the marketplace, in the quiet movements of people going about their lives. Something was about to shift. He walked toward the river, noticing how the water reflected the early light in streaks of silver. For weeks, he had practiced shaping thought and aligning it with heart, feeling the ripples of his mind in the actions of others. He had faced shadows, storms, doubts, and uncertainties, and he had learned the fragile, delicate art of influence. But now he knew the next step would demand more, not small gestures, not subtle ripples, but decisive action and unwavering trust in the power he had been cultivating. As he approached the town square, he saw it, a small crowd gathered around a commotion near the fountain. A young boy had fallen into the water, struggling, flailing as the current pulled him. Panic rippled through the onlookers, voices rose, hands reached out, yet no one could act fast enough. Thomas's heart surged. He felt the familiar tension of fear and doubt, but the guiding light of clarity burned bright within him. He had faced storms before, but this moment demanded immediate, focused action. Without hesitation, he pushed through the crowd, keeping his mind calm and centered. He focused not on fear, but on the intention to save the boy, aligning thought and heart as he reached the edge of the water. He extended his arms, steady and sure, and grasped the boy just as the current threatened to pull him under. The child's eyes widened, terror giving way to relief, and Thomas felt the flow of connection, the tangible power of aligned thought and action coursing through him. The crowd murmured, some in awe, some in silent relief. The boy's mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, clutching her child to her chest. Thomas stepped back, heart pounding, realizing that this single moment crystallized everything he had been learning. The mind could guide, the heart could endure, and together they could shape life itself. Yet even as he stood there, a shadow of unease brushed against him. The notebook's lessons and the blackbird's messages had warned that trials would come in many forms. The power to act carried responsibility beyond the immediate moment. Every ripple he created would spread, unseen and unpredictable. Thomas understood that this rescue was not the end, but a threshold, a gateway into a deeper understanding of the mind's power and the consequences of action. That evening, he returned home, soaked from the river and exhausted, but alight with a sense of accomplishment and purpose. The candle flickered as he opened the notebook, tracing the flowing words with reverence. Action born of clarity and courage becomes the seed of transformation. But beware, the world will reflect not just your intentions, but the depths of your heart. Thomas reflected on the day, on the boy's frightened eyes and the mother's tears, and he felt a profound shift within himself. The shadows he had faced, the storms he had weathered, the countless small choices, all had led to this moment, a tangible manifestation of thought and heart converging into life-changing action. He realized that the threshold he had crossed was both a culmination and a beginning. As night settled over the town, Thomas felt the subtle stirrings of anticipation and uncertainty. Beyond the walls of his home, beyond the familiar streets and the quiet river, the world waited with challenges and opportunities yet unseen. The blackbird's message came to mind, step through, and you will see what you must become. He now understood that stepping through was not merely an act of courage, it was a commitment to embrace transformation fully, to accept the responsibility of shaping life with both mind and heart. Lying in bed, Thomas felt the pulse of the unseen world pressing gently yet insistently. The boy's safety, the ripple of relief in the crowd, the surge of connection, they were proof of what he could achieve, yet they were also reminders of what was at stake. The threshold of change was not a place, but a state of being, a constant balance of thought, heart, and action, always tested by circumstance, always demanding vigilance. And as he drifted towards sleep, Thomas sensed movement beyond the familiar, a whisper carried on the night wind, you have stepped through. The next trial awaits, deeper and more profound. Your mind and heart must rise together, or the shadows will follow. Chapter 11. The Mirror of Consequences. The town awoke under a grey sky, the clouds low and heavy, carrying the weight of the night before. Thomas stepped outside, feeling a restless energy that he could not yet name. The rescue at the river had left him exhilarated, but it had also stirred a quiet tension within, a sense that every action, every thought, every intention sent ripples far beyond his sight. He had glimpsed the power of mind and heart, but now it seemed the world was ready to show him their consequences. As he walked through the streets, Thomas noticed subtle shifts. A merchant who had been distant the day before now smiled, nodding in greeting, yet another frowned, their expression tight with suspicion. Small, ordinary interactions felt charged, vibrating with outcomes he could not predict. He realized that the world was, in a sense, a mirror, reflecting not just his actions but the depth of his intentions. By midday, a commotion drew him to the town square. A dispute had erupted between two merchants, heated words flying over spilled goods. The crowd had gathered, murmuring with curiosity and unease. Thomas stepped forward, heart steady, recalling the lessons he had learned, clarity, alignment of mind and heart, and deliberate action. He focused on calm, imagining the tension dissolving, but he also felt a twinge of fear. Would his presence be enough to influence the outcome? Would his intentions reach their mark? As he spoke to the crowd, his voice calm yet authoritative, he noticed subtle changes. The merchants paused, their anger softening. Some bystanders stepped forward to help, others relaxed into silence. Yet, even as harmony seemed to return, Thomas saw a shadow linger in one man's eyes, a doubt, a resentment that had not vanished, a reminder that consequences are rarely simple or immediate. The realization struck him with a quiet force. Thought and heart could guide, but they could not control. Life's reflections were intricate, layered, and unpredictable. Even the purest intention could yield outcomes beyond comprehension, some gentle, some turbulent, some hidden until revealed later. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility pressing down again, more acutely than ever. That evening, he returned home, the notebook waiting. He lit the candle, its flickering light casting shadows that seemed alive. He wrote feverishly, tracing the events of the day, the small victories, the lingering tensions, and the unspoken consequences. Each line reminded him that mastery was not about perfection but about vigilance, about observing and learning from the mirror the world held up to him. A knock at the door broke his concentration. Thomas rose cautiously. Outside, no one was visible, only a folded piece of paper on the step. He picked it up and read the flowing script. The mirror shows all: thought, heart, action, consequence. Reflect with honesty, act with courage, and the unseen will guide you. Fail, and the shadows deepen. Thomas felt a shiver, both of fear and of anticipation. He understood that the mirror was not a punishment, but a teacher, a way for the world to reveal the hidden effects of intention and the depth of responsibility inherent in shaping life. He felt the stirrings of a new awareness. Mastery of thought was not enough. Mastery of self, of reaction, of the unseen currents of consequence, was required. The night deepened, and Thomas lay in bed, recalling each moment of the day, each subtle shift in the world, each shadow that lingered. He understood that the next trial would demand full integration, mind, heart, and a keen awareness of how every ripple of thought could travel far beyond immediate perception. The mirror had shown him both promise and peril, and as the wind whispered through the eaves, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth, Thomas heard it again, soft but insistent: the mirror is only the beginning. The next reflection will test all you have built, all you have chosen, and all you have yet to become. Chapter 12. The threshold of mastery. The dawn was unlike any Thomas had known. A pale, almost surreal light filtered through the town, painting the cobblestones in silver and gold. The air was still, heavy with expectation, and Thomas felt it in every nerve. Today would not be ordinary. He could sense the unseen currents of consequence swirling around him, the accumulated weight of all the choices, thoughts, and actions that had brought him to this moment. He walked to the river first, its surface calm but reflective, as if waiting to show him something he had yet to see. Thomas knelt at the edge, peering into the water. For the first time, he realized that the river was more than a mirror of his thoughts. It was a doorway, a symbol of the ongoing flow of life, always moving, always shifting, never fully controlled. To step into mastery, he would have to move with it, not against it. The town stirred as he returned to the square, where a gathering had already formed. Today's challenge was visible in the faces of the people, a tension that had grown over weeks, subtle misunderstandings, and unspoken conflicts, now converging. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settle fully on his shoulders. He knew that here, thought alone would not suffice, nor would heart alone. Only the full integration of mind, heart, and will could navigate what was to come. The first test arose swiftly. A dispute erupted between two neighbors, a misunderstanding that escalated quickly. The crowd's murmurs rose to shouts. Thomas stepped forward, focusing inward first, centering his mind, aligning his heart, summoning the calm and clarity he had cultivated over countless days. He did not act immediately. He allowed himself to become a conduit, a steady presence amid the turbulence. Slowly, deliberately, he spoke. His words were simple, yet they carried the full weight of his intent, the quiet power of calm thought, the unwavering truth of his heart. The neighbors paused, the shouting faded, and the crowd grew still. Thomas felt the subtle pull of the unseen currents, sensing where tension lingered and where understanding could take root. With patience and presence, he guided both parties to see not only each other's perspective but their own intentions, their own fears. A minute stretched, yet Thomas held firm. The crowd shifted, tensions dissolved, and harmony emerged, fragile, yet real. He realized then the truth that had been forming throughout his journey: mastery is not the elimination of chaos or shadow, but the ability to navigate it, to channel it, and to act with clarity, compassion, and courage amid the unpredictable tides of life. The moment passed, and Thomas stood alone in the square, heart racing, mind steady. The townspeople watched him quietly, some in awe, some in contemplation, but all touched by the invisible force that had reshaped the day. Thomas understood that this was not a display of power, but a reflection of inner alignment, the merging of thought, heart, and action into a living force. As the evening settled, he returned home, the notebook open before him. The candle flickered, casting long shadows that danced like whispers on the walls. He wrote, capturing not only the events of the day but the feelings, the realizations, and the unspoken truths that had emerged. He understood now that mastery was not a final state but a continuous journey, a practice of awareness, reflection, and deliberate action. A soft tapping at the window made him look up. Perched there, as always, was the blackbird, eyes gleaming with intelligence. Around its leg hung a final scroll. Thomas untied it and read the words, each one resonating deep within: you have crossed the threshold. Mind, heart, and will aligned. The ripples you send forth now shape not only your world, but all that touches it. Remember, mastery is living the truth of your thoughts with courage, compassion, and purpose. Thomas felt a profound stillness. The trials, the storms, the shadows, the ripples, all had converged to bring him here. He realized that the journey had never been about controlling the world, but about shaping himself, and through himself, influencing the currents of life with integrity and awareness. The power was quiet, subtle, yet immense, flowing outward from every deliberate thought and every act born of heart. And as night fell, Thomas stood at his window, gazing at the town below, the river flowing endlessly, the stars shimmering above. He felt a complete alignment, a harmony of mind, heart, and will. Yet even in that stillness, a whisper lingered on the wind, gentle and eternal: the journey continues. Each day is a test, each thought a choice, each act a ripple. Live with awareness, and the world becomes a reflection of your true self. Thomas smiled, the tension of fear and doubt fully released. He had crossed the threshold of mastery, not as a final triumph, but as a beginning, the beginning of a life lived consciously, courageously, and with profound intention. The world around him shimmered with possibility, every shadow a teacher, every ripple a reminder, and every choice a chance to shape life with clarity and heart. If this journey spoke to you, imagine what's next. Which book should we explore together next time? The Power of Now, Atomic Habits, or maybe The Alchemist? Share your choice in the comments. I read every one. And if you found value in this story, remember to like, subscribe, and keep your momentum strong, because your mind creates your world, and here we build it together.